it's Lisa. I'm continuing with the mini album that I started in the last video, where I organized the photos and I put white gesso on each of the pieces that are part of the mini album, each of the pages. In this video, I'm going to look at a color scheme for the album and then start looking at some of the finishes for the pages. I want to do several mixed media techniques, so we're going to get started on those in this video. So let's talk color scheme, and then we'll talk supplies, and then we'll get into some of the mixed media. First though, I had all of these pieces of chipboard that I had coated with gesso. I had wax paper between each of the sheets, and then I had a book sitting on them to weight them. They warped just a little bit, but I sort of pushed them back in shape while they were still wet, and then once they dried or got really what I felt like was dry, but just in case, I put the wax paper between them, set a book on them for not even, I don't know, it might have been overnight, but they have dried out really nicely. Now I'm going to be adding a lot more stuff to them, probably some more moisture, so there may be a little bit of warpage, but they're coming out pretty good. And I have also numbered them. I've started over here where the hole punch is, so this should get covered up, but if not, it won't be very, very visible. I've just numbered them the same numbers to correspond, 1 through, I think it's 14, to correspond with my pages. So I'm not going to be doing these in order. I'm probably going to start here with pages 4 and 5 so I don't get mixed up and get the wrong sheets and then not have things the way that I want them in the album. All right, now let's talk a little bit about the color scheme. And to do that, I have to tell you a little bit about the garden and what I was doing. I may have given the impression in the first video that my husband and I don't really garden, we just go look at gardens. We do. It's just that following through on our complete plans doesn't always work out. Either he gets busy with work, or in my case I get tired of the heat, and we never quite get things to where we want to get them. And this year I did, and I was really pleased with that. And most of our gardening has been a lot of foundation plantings around the house, and then gardening in beds further away from the house. This was the first time I had really, especially in the front of the house, taken out any foundation plants and put in flowers. And I had to make a real commitment to this because this window in front here, I look out all the time, and I was going to be seeing this. So if I didn't keep it up, it was going to be really noticeable, not just to me, but to anybody coming to my front door. So I really needed to follow through on my plans, and it came out really great. As I said, we had some good weather this summer, and that helped, and I hope that'll be the case next summer. The color scheme comes from the color for the album comes from the color scheme of this particular garden. Now there's some pictures from around back, but there in any gardening pictures you're going to have a lot of green. So we're going to do green and yellow and white. I did a yellow and white garden in the front. A white garden is something sometimes people do where they do all white flowers. I've heard of that before, but I decided to add a little yellow into it. I thought it would be hard to find enough white flowers. It turned out it was a little bit hard to find enough yellow flowers. But I did a lot of different shades of green, a little bit of red snuck in here. So part of our color scheme is going to be green and white and yellow primarily with some touches of red, just like the garden. The reason I chose this more neutral color scheme is it went with some of the items that I was placing in the garden, the cushion and the chair that were at my mom's. But also I was going to be seeing this from the inside of my house, a really big view of it, and I didn't want a real busy garden that looked, it was going to almost look like it was part of the living room, and I didn't want it to compete with the rest of the house. So I wanted something fairly neutral. And so that's where the color scheme came from for the garden, and that's where it's kind of come from for the mini album. Now I'd like to play with a lot of my different mixed media elements just because I haven't used a lot of them in a long time, and it's fun to do that. And when you have a mini album, you don't have to worry about everything fitting into page protectors. Now I will, because I'm going to be using some watercolors on this and things that are not water fast, I will need to take this entire album when it's completed and store it in a plastic bag or something so that, probably is a large Ziploc bag, something so that if it were to get wet, a pipe broke or something and things got wet, it would not damage the album. So that's just an extra precaution I'm going to need to take. And it's not a bad idea anyway when you have a mini album, because you don't have those page protectors to hold things. So if one of your elements falls off, it truly falls off. So it's a good idea to put them in something when they're not being displayed. And this one I don't really plan to display, or at least not for very long. It'll be just for my memories. Now, this is pages 4 and 5, so I'm going to go ahead and get those pages out here, those pieces of the mini album, and just set everything else aside. And let's look at some of our supplies for these pages. So this is how it's going to lay on there. That's how the photos will lay. And I want to do a background for them. I have several mixed media methods that I want to use on this album. So I have a lot of different things out here. We're going to work with some gesso on some of the pages. So the white gesso, we're not done with that. There'll be more of that going on. I've got a bunch of different acrylic paints in different colors. I have heavy gel gloss medium from, this happens to be Liquitex, it could be any brand. I have light modeling paste, but I was playing with it a while ago and it's not that light anymore. It's down to where there's not a ton in there, and what there is starting to harden a bit. It still works, but it's not going to be quite as light as it was originally, but that's fine for what I'm going to be doing. And I have some re-inkers, and those will come in with that gloss gel. I also want to do something with jelly printing, and I have already done some of that in the past, so when we get to that part, I won't be actually doing the jelly printing as part of the videos. I have other videos on jelly printing, but I already had some prints that I can use on the album. For this 2-pager, I think I'm going to do the modeling paste technique on these pages, and I need stencils. For many of these techniques, I'll need stencils. So here are the stencils that I've pulled. Now I've got lots more stencils. I have this one I like the size of this, and I also like the fact that it has these vines on it, so that one's a good option for some of the pages. And then I have some that are smaller designs. I might cover an entire page by moving them across the page as I work, or I might just cover a section of the page. I really like this one. I think that one is a fun one. I was looking through the photos, and I think for this layout, this particular stencil is going to be the best one for this page at least. And I don't know, I think what I may do is just do the modeling paste technique over here, and since this page is going to be covered with a lot of photos, I probably with it will just do some paint to correspond with the modeling paste, or I might do the gesso technique. We'll see. I'm just going to treat this page by itself for the time being. So I'm going to set all of the rest of this aside. And I need one other thing. What I want to do is to cover this with modeling paste, and then we're going to use some watercolors over it. And I will be putting this photo on, and what will work the best is if I create a spot for the photo so it can just nestle in between all of the modeling paste. The modeling paste adds quite a bit of texture, and I want the photo to sort of be around the photo. So, and I've got enough room. I'm trying to decide if I want to mat it or not. I could mat the photo. I don't think I will. I think I'm just going to do the pure 4x6. So what I need is a piece of 4x6 cardstock that I can tape on here and then put my modeling paste over and just lift it off. I'm taping down the 4x6 cardstock. It doesn't take much tape because as soon as the modeling paste starts attaching to this, it's not going anywhere. Now I have a little bit larger stencil, so I have a lot of flexibility in where I place things. I do wish that I had used a colored piece of cardstock instead of white, because I have a white background that it's on. I'm putting white modeling paste over it. I can't tell where the photo is. I'm protecting the surface, but I can't visibly see it. So it would have been better if I had used any color for the background or for the 4x6 piece. But nonetheless, I get modeling paste on there. I'm not putting it on super thick because I want it to dry, and I don't want it to be, really, really thick and protruding out from the page. But I do want a little bit of texture to it, because when we put the watercolors on there, that texture is what's going to really show some different shading with the watercolors. And you can always lift up a corner, kind of hold down the other ends and see if there's anything missing. And one of the advantages I'll have too with this stencil is if there's an open area like up there at the top, if I'm careful so I don't squash any of the other modeling paste, I can fill in that space with a little bit of a different design. This is a kind of stencil that can be more random. Now the page that corresponds to this, I'm just going to add more gesso, and I'm going to put it on a little bit gloppy so that it has more texture to it. I learned this technique from Wilna Furstenberg, I believe is how her name is pronounced. I don't know. It's been many, many years. This was over at the Two Peas in a Bucket when they had a site selling scrapbooking supplies. She did class, and I learned about doing the gesso and then adding the watercolors to it, and I think it's wonderful. So what I'm going to do now, you can see I have a template here for all my colors, so I know which colors out of my palette that I want to pick. I don't really have to test them anywhere. And I'm using some really good quality watercolors. These can be cheap watercolors. It doesn't matter. You use anything that you have for this technique. I am using a cheaper old brush because I am going to be coming up against that rough texture of the modeling paste, so I didn't want to use one of my really super good brushes. And I'm kind of alternating between a hooker's green, sap green, and a yellow. I don't remember what the yellow is called, but I think it's Hansa yellow light, something like that. I don't remember. I've had my watercolors now for most of them for a few months or close to a year, so I don't really remember the names of the colors, but it doesn't matter. I'm just adding some color to this, and you'll get some great shading. It's going to look it'll look a little like watercolors. It won't be perfectly blended. That's not what you're going for here. You're not looking for that kind of technique. You're just looking to get color on and to be able to see all that shading and variation. It's supposed to look a little messy, in other words. And the photo is going to look really pretty on that. And then on the other page that has a lot of photos on it, I'm just going to cover the whole thing with a bunch of the greens as well. And the texture from the gesso will create some interesting texture here also. It won't be as much as the other page, but that's fine because you're not going to see a lot of this background. Most of it's going to be covered up with the photos. I'll need to have a little bit coming up the middle because of the separation between the two photos. Continuing on here with this green and yellow palette throughout the album. And you can take a paper towel and pull some of it off, and that also adds a different kind of texture to it too. The paper towel can sort of create some marks in it if you like that look. Now for these next two pages, all right, these two are dried, and these next two pages, I'm wanting to emphasize the wood that I did on this potting table. I repurposed a table from my basement and turned it into a potting table, and I love it. And I want to do a page on that. So this one's going to deviate a little bit from the color scheme in that I want to do a beige background. So I'm painting the whole background beige, and then I'm going to add just a little bit of white gesso to touch up on it. This page on the right, what I'm doing there is I painted that green, and then I did the same technique with the modeling paste and a stencil across the bottom to kind of mimic the fence, and I just did that off camera. Now I'm adding a little bit to the beige page. I'm adding some, I want to use, there's also a piece of ironwork that came from my mother's house that I have in this area, and I want to accentuate that. So I've got a stamp for that, and I'm doing a wood grain stamp across the entire background using some Distress Oxide. I used the frayed burlap color. I tested a couple of colors, and this is the one that I think looked the best. These are the inks that I have started using because they just seem to really work the best. That's I got rid of a lot of my Stampin' Up inks I'd had for years and years and years. And I really like the Distress Oxides. You can do so many different things with them. Now on this paper, they're kind of working okay, not fabulously, not back paper, I mean chipboard, because it's not a completely flat surface. But I'm still getting the idea of that wood grain, and it shows up better in person. It did not come out very good, I can see here on the camera, but in detail you can see that a little bit better. Now I'm going to use some archival ink to stamp black flourishes. This is a very old flourish set that I have. It's probably my most used stamp set ever. I've used it for so many things over the last probably 15 years or so. And that will just bring out that wrought iron piece in the photo. These two pages are also in the backyard, and they're a little different because there's a lot of color in the garden. So we're going to do a little more color on the background. This is where I'm using some Gelli prints, and I'd done these a long time ago, so I didn't show them creating them. But you create Gelli prints like you would any others. I have a lot of videos on Gelli prints. You just do them on tissue paper. The tissue paper is the white tissue paper that I buy mine at the dollar store, that you buy to put to wrap gifts, and it creates, once it's going on a white background here, but even if the background had color to it, it becomes almost transparent. So what you really see is the paint. You don't really see anything white in the background, even if there's white showing through. It doesn't. It's coming from the chipboard. It's not coming from the tissue paper. And you just apply it with Mod Podge, and then I put a layer of that over the top of it as well. Now if this turns out too busy, I can always add some paint and kind of, a little bit of paint along to sort of bring it all together if I need to. I'm doing red and yellow Gelli prints over here on this page that's going to have some flower photos, and this next page is going to be kind of a landscape of the background of the backyard. I have two photos that I'm just sort of joining together in a manual panorama kind of look. The old-fashioned way of doing a panorama, taking a couple of photos and just piecing them together. I realized that's what I had when I started playing with the photos, so that's what I'm going to do with them. I could reprint them, but I'm not. I really don't like to have to reprint photos. I don't like reprinting photos to begin with, and I sure don't like going back and having to reprint them if I don't have to. I send my photos out to print. I've tried printing photos at home, and to me it's more work, more money, and all than it's worth. So I kind of work with what I have on the photos. I'm going to add a little bit of red to the right-hand page. And then this page is near the end of the album. This is going to have pictures of some of the flowers that we have from our cut garden. And this is something we've been doing for a long time, is growing flowers, especially gladiolas, to cut. My husband started doing this for me years ago because it's my favorite flower. And I do have them a little closer to the house now. They're easier to cut and bring in and do arrangements. I'm using some heavy gel medium. It's white to start with, but it will dry clear. So the color that I'm adding from reinkers, a green reinker and a yellow one to try to get a kiwi color, it's going to dry a little bit lighter. So to test it, I need to spread it really thin
because it will dry, it will dry a little bit darker. So I need to spread it pretty thin, and ideally I'd need to let it dry, but I decided just to go ahead with it. Sometimes I get out the heat gun and dry it, sometimes I just go with it, and so I'm just going with it today. And what I'm doing is creating a border around. The photos are going to be in the middle, so I decided to use this stencil that I thought would make a really good border, just going around the whole page, transferring the page number to the middle where it'll get covered up with a photo. And so I'm just spreading this gel medium that's been colored with reinkers. And I chose a stencil that would be easy to piece. It would be easy to do a section and then just move it over and do another section. And because the page is 6 inches wide and the stencil is 6 inches wide, doing the end will fit nicely. And we get a pretty border going all the way around. And like all of this stuff, it's a little loose, a little messy. It's not perfect. Okay. Now I have all of the pages, backgrounds done of the album. I did some more techniques like we saw earlier in the video. This is a Gelli print. That's actually going to be on the front page. There'll be a big photo over top of it. And then I did some more modeling paste, and this time I added some color to the modeling paste. So I added that green reinker and created a nice rough texture in that stencil that I like so much for those pages. These are the ones that were shown earlier in the video with the watercolors. I painted a few pages. This is Martha Stewart Pearl Paint and a couple of shades of green, and then I just used some gesso through with the stencil to add a little bit of white. It'll work with the photos. Love this background with the Gelli prints. I don't have a video of doing those on tissue paper, so I'm probably going to need to do a video like that. Here's the one where he did some stamping. Again, it doesn't show up that great on the video, but it's there. And then this last page with the border. And the backing will just be a solid piece with a few photos on it. So that's all of the backgrounds. So I hope you'll check out the next video that's coming where we do journaling and embellishments for this mini album. Thanks for watching.